Hello, good evening. My name is Lulu Chow Wang. Graduated from Columbia Business School in '83, and I'm the chair and founder of Tupelo Capital Management, and very proudly the moderator of tonight's event. Tonight is the 29th program of the Sir Gordon Wu Distinguished Speakers series, which is hosted by the Jerome Chazen Institute of Global Business at Columbia Business School. The Chazen Institute, as many of you know, is really the hub for global business at the Columbia Business School. The event tonight is really the culmination of two of the Chazen Institute's leading programs on China, the Sir Gordon Wu Speaker Forum, and then the Lulu Wang Senior Asian Scholars. Both of the programs endeavor to focus on the business leaders as well as the academic and professional leaders of China. And we bring them to the campus to share and to practitioners as well as scholarly discourse. Now tonight, we are deeply honored to have our keynote speaker, Ms. Deb Lu. And she follows in the wake of a number of very prominent speakers who come before the Wu Forum in the past. Most notably is Daniel Xu, one of the co-founders and CIO of Tencent, and Ma Weihua, who is the legendary president of China Merchants Bank, and then Wei Christensen, who just retired as the CEO for Morgan Stanley China, and then the co-CEO of Asia Pacific. And from Taiwan, since we try to have a very balanced roster of speakers, Stephen Pang, one of our alums, and the head of the largest listed hotel operator in Taiwan, the Formosa International Hotels. So before I hand the podium over to Deb, I just would like to give you a quick review of her many, many distinguished achievements. Deb received her BS in civil engineering at Duke University, and her MBA, unfortunately not at Columbia, but a very good school, Stanford. And she lives in California with her husband and 3 kids. Just the 3 kids alone is quite an achievement, Deb. Deb Lu joined Ancestry.com in March of 2021. So really in the pandemic. And she joined as president and CEO and is a member of the board of directors. Prior to joining Ancestry, Deb was a senior executive at Facebook, where she created and led Facebook's marketplace. She also led the development of Facebook's first mobile ad product with apps, building the company's business games and payment platform, including Facebook Pay. She was named by Payment Source as one of the most influential women in payments and one of Business Insider's most powerful female engineers. And Deb has worked in the tech world for 18 years. She doesn't look old enough to have done 18 years, but she's a long-term pro there. And prior to Facebook, Deb had years of product experience at PayPal and eBay, and actually led the integration of these 2 products. Perhaps particularly interesting to me and to many of our audience tonight, she has really been a great advocate for diversity and women in technology. And because, and related to that, she's the founder of Women in Product, a nonprofit organization to connect and support women in the product management field, including technology. She serves on the board of Intuit, and she's also a seed investor and advisor to several startups. She's also a member of the Committee 100, where Deb and I have our connection. We're both fellow members, and I know we have many members online tonight. And notably, as an outstanding Asian American, she received an award from the Gold House to recognize her impact on the Asian American community. Now, interestingly enough, Deb is in the process, she has just finished a wonderful book, and it'll be published September 2022. And it has a wonderful title, and the title is Take Back Your Power. It is going to be distributed to the first 100 of you who came on, logged in tonight. So you early birds get rewarded. we will, if you can email Ryan Hotta, who will be managing the distribution of the books. And his email is rkh212.gsbcolumbia.edu. He will then be able to make sure that the books arrive. And I can't wait for my copy, Deb. So we have a terrific program before us tonight. And without further ado, I'd like to begin to just a conversation with Deb and give her a chance to talk about her wonderful experience dealing with leadership, particularly as a woman in the tech field, but many other issues of leadership that are the same for both men and women. One of the things that I think has become an iconic conversation among women, Deb, has been a quote that you made about Sheryl Sandberg, that when you read her, when you talked to her, she spoke to you in 5 words, which really, really impacted and changed your life. And I wonder if for those who have not heard about this famous conversation, if you could share with us tonight what that was and why it impacted you.
Yeah, I just finished a product review with all the executives at Facebook. And, it was one of those meetings with, all VPs at the company. And I remember walking away from the conversation feeling really good about it. And Sheryl pulled me aside. She said, "Deb, you can stop fighting now. You've won." And I just remember thinking, what do you mean? And she said, you have such fight in you. I had fought for everything that I had. I felt like I needed to fight for every decision. I had grown up in a place. So I grew up, I was born in Queens, New York. And then when I was 6, I moved to Charleston, South Carolina, a small town outside of Charleston.
Oh,
And growing up the way I look and who I was very, very difficult in a small town in the South. Mm-hmm. And you can imagine that. And so I just felt like I had to fight for everything, to not be discriminated against, to not have people egg our house, to not have people constantly tell me that I didn't belong. And so I had this fight and I brought that through. And one thing that you should know is that the thing that takes you to where you are will always fail you at some point. And what happened was I used that fight, that anger, that disappointment in how I grew up as fuel to make me successful. And then I realized that at some point it was starting to burn me, that this fuel was actually hurting more than it was helping. Mm-hmm. And so I reflected on that, and this article came out from CNBC, if you want to read it, and it's really about how those words really made me reflect on the thing that made me successful was starting to hurt me. Mm-hmm. And later I wrote an article, so I have a Substack and someone can share the link, but I have a Substack and I wrote an article about my reflection on this, about how the things that, whatever your past is, those things can make you successful, but they can also be your Achilles heel. Mm-hmm. And so, what I realized was that I had used that fight too much and that I needed to lead with grace. And that was a transition for me. And it took me a long time to get there, even after she said that. But it was also a moment when I realized that, the things that I loved about what gave me power and strength also could take away the same thing.
Right. And it's interesting that this need to be strong is very characteristic of women in business. They feel that they're expected to be strong, not show weakness. And sometimes they don't realize at a certain point, either they no longer have to exhibit that kind of a macho characteristic because it begins to hurt their relationship with people. Yeah. And I think we all know in management, your ability to lead people is so 90% of the game. But in terms of how you have grown over the times, since you became CEO of Ancestry, you've had a whole new set of responsibilities. And in the very early days of Ancestry, did you feel you had to have a set plan for the first 90 days? And if you had that, did they pan out okay for you?
Well, I think when you go into a new job, and actually I wrote about this past week, which is all the mistakes I made. I reflected on a year back and I kind of share a little of the lessons. And I was talking to a fellow CEO who was also appointed last year. And she said, I made all the same mistakes too. But, when you come into an organization, there's so much context that you're missing, why things are the way they are. It's easy to blame the previous administration. It's easy to make mistakes, not understanding why things are, situated the way they are. And I encourage, the way that I wanted to start. And even when I came in with the best intentions, I still made these mistakes. Be curious rather than critical. Because when you go in, you have fresh eyes, you see what's broken, but you don't know why. And in some ways, those fresh eyes are really precious and they're really special. But at the same time, if you go about it the wrong way, if you judge without context, you risk alienating the people around you. And so for me, I started with a listening tour where the first couple months I listened to about 60 or 70 people within the organization. And then I summarized it as kind of a state of the union, and I shared the inputs. And I think that actually was a great way to start. But at the same time, I think taking that a step further, how do you continue that conversation? Because now, after about 90 days, they kind of expect you to have the answer. And you don't. I mean, this company is 35 years old. How would someone 3 months in be able to have the answers? And so really continuing that inquiry and curiosity, that was really important as part of the work that we were doing. We shared a new vision, but it was the what. And then the question was, how are we going to implement it? Right. And the how was really bringing everybody else along. And if you can say the what and you can be right, but if you can't bring people along, you risk alienating everyone and getting nothing done.
Absolutely. I think your beginning with a listening tour was so wise. I think so many people, again, because they try to show strength, they hit the ground running and they want to issue their mandates right away. But I think the best leaders that I know of have really spent a lot of time listening, and they become known to the people who work for them that this is a guy who is the boss, but he or she listens. And listening has two advantages. One, you learn a lot.
Yes.
And two, it shows respect for the people you're working with. And respect, it goes a long way to making people feel that they want to accept you, that you can be their leader. So it's so interesting to hear your listening tour, and then sharing your observations as you, as a newcomer, listen, pick up what is the way things are done, and be able to reflect: is the way it's always been done a good way, or maybe there's room for change, and how might you suggest in a very constructive way to the team? I think this is all the beginnings of a great leader, and so glad that that's how you proceeded. But let's talk a little bit about Ancestry. I think many people here have probably used it and are familiar with it. But now, as the CEO, what do you see as the biggest challenge ahead of this growth business? And is it too early now to ask you for a vision?
Well, one of the things that is important for our vision is we have traditionally just been a very successful company serving a core audience. So these are people who are core genealogists who want to discover their family history. All the records that we have tended to be from Western European origins. And so if you were an American immigrant from Western European origins, or you're in Western Europe, we had an amazing product. But someone coming in who looks very different than the core customer, I was reminded that according to a McKinsey study that I saw as I was coming in, 80% of families actually are interested in their family history. Just because we don't have those records, we haven't scanned them, we haven't talked to the parishes, doesn't mean that people of different races or from different parts of the world do not care about their family. And we had built such a deep and engaging product, but for a sliver of the world. And so the work that we're doing is really building Ancestry for all. Making it possible for everyone to discover, connect, and craft their own family story. And so that's the vision that we set out, which was really not just for the people for whom we have records, but what if we made a product that was more accessible to everyone, regardless of your history? What if we made it possible for you to maybe tell your own story? So we don't have the records from, the British government, from where, the ship records from France, but we have, so much of your family history is really the stories that your grandmother or your mother are still telling today. How do we help build a platform to tell that story? And that's the next chapter of where we want to go, is to make it more social, make it community oriented. To really not just be, hey, let's build a family tree, but let's actually capture all those family stories that have been passed down for generations, so that we can capture it for future generations too.
Yeah, well, that's so important. And it's interesting if you look across different cultures. certain cultures are known to be very family oriented, and that's the basis for their strength. And notably, it's usually the Asians are referred to as being strong on family, perhaps the Latinos as well, and other cultures not as strong on the family basis. But as you look at your users across Ancestry.com, do you see any kind of patterns forming in terms of what sectors or cultures tend to be really interested in what they can gain from Ancestry?
Well, I think that different cultures, because our product was so much based on records that we already had, it's skewed towards those of Western European descent, at least for now.
Right.
And we hope to expand that. It doesn't mean that people don't try to use our product, it's that we haven't built that product for kind of everyone. That said, I would say that most people actually do care about their family and their family history, but it is something which takes time and investment to, you know, really like, are you sitting down and actually capturing those things? And we hear stories of people who, you know, when their grandmother, one person came up to me at a conference and said, when my grandmother was passing away, she was in hospice. I just asked her so that I could capture everything, the names of everyone. And we built the family tree together. I stored all of it on Ancestry so that I can tell my kids someday, because they'll never get a chance to see this.
Right.
And, you know, this is somebody who, you know, said, I just never thought to capture all these things until she was very, very sick. And I hope that that's what we do, is we don't wait till the end of someone's life to capture it, but that we're capturing along the way, that all the stories you tell at Christmas, or, you know, when you reminisce about your favorite place of vacation, or, hey, you know, did you know that your family came from here and we have a connection there? Those are the places and times when you're capturing a little bit at a time, as opposed to trying to capture an entire lifetime of memories in 2 weeks.
Right. Do you sort of provide a how-to for your families to begin to cobble together the stories and build it into something more sustainable?
So that is something we're starting to work on, which is right now it's mostly, you know, you come in and you put in the information you have, we hint, we show you what we have, and you're slowly unfolding your story that way. But what we'd love to do is, for example, do a Q&A. You know, you can send your mother or your great aunt these 10 questions they would fill out, you know, because then it's structured. It's like, you know, what do you remember about where you grew up? You know, do you remember, you know, can you tell me what your parents were like? Things that you would just not naturally in a conversation just pull out and start saying, but to give your great aunt an opportunity to share her story too. And as part of this own journey, I have been, you know, looking into my family history. And so I started contacting my cousins and my aunts and uncles, who are, a lot of my aunts and uncles are in their 90s or 80s. And I asked them, like, what's the name of the village we're from in China? Because I never knew. I had actually been there, but I didn't actually know the specific village. I know the area. And so they said, you know, they thought about it. I actually had to ask several people, and now they found the actual name of the village where my father's family is from and where my mother's family is from. And it was something that I just didn't know until I started this journey myself as well.
Well, listen, it's so important for all of us to speak to the older generation, because all too soon they pass. And sometimes you've lost that generation above you, and they're the holders of the family archives and the memories. And so anytime you have an older member of the family who still has good memories, it's important to try to get, when my mother turned 90, she lived 103.
Oh, wow.
But when she turned 90, we thought we needed to do something really to capture and celebrate her life. So we took, there were 9 adult members of the family, and I just arbitrarily divided her life into 9 chapters. And each family was assigned a chapter, and each family was charged with interviewing her, writing that part of her life, and then finding the pictures in the scrapbooks.
Oh my God.
It was a wonderful thing, because one, my mother loved it. When you get older, sometimes you feel your family sort of forgets you. And each family spent a lot of time really interviewing her. And thank goodness, she was the only one left in the generation who remembered what life was like in China, the different relatives. She went through all the political upheavals and migration to the US. But this was captured in each chapter by each family in their voice.
Oh, wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, so the chapters had different voices, but the main character was still my mom. So if it's something that you and your participants can do, it's a great way to capture life before you lose all the memories. But so we've all talked about family, and that's really the key to your business. And do you find that with the rise of the nuclear family and globalism and now the deglobalization, do you find families are actually changing in the way they view each other or view themselves?
Well, I think one thing that COVID has done is it's reminded us the power of family. You know,
Mhm.
for so long, I think, you know, when you have access to your family anytime, it's very different than when you lose access to them. You can't see each other for 2.5 years, right? Most people haven't seen their family in a couple of years at this point,
Right.
at least, you know, and so think about that. And then think about that dislocation or disconnection. And I
Mhm.
think it has reminded us how powerful family really is when you can't see them, you can't access them, and how difficult that is. And so that is a good reminder because you know,
Mhm.
people are spread all over the world. And I think now, you know, I saw my friend was just saying that she saw her mother for the first time in 2.5 years, and how touching, and you know, and her mother hasn't seen her daughter in 2.5 years, and her daughter's 5, right? So half her life she hasn't seen her grandmother.
Oh, yes.
It's how, you know, fortunately, my in-laws had moved here just before the pandemic, like a year or two before the pandemic.
Mhm.
My mother lives with us, so we didn't have that happen to us. But, you know, just think about the dislocation of like not being able to go home and to see what's happening only through FaceTime or Zoom.
Yeah,
So that is one of the most important things, is now we're reminded that life is short and, you know,
absolutely.
very fragile, and it's something that
Mhm.
we need to remember.
All right. That's really one of the great upsides of the pandemic, that we all really we spent time with our families and began to really appreciate them. And talking about different generations, you're now old enough to be the dispenser of advice. And so there are many young people on the call tonight who are just so anxious to hear what advice you might have for them, young men, young women, particularly the young women, because they know what a champion you are of women, but and particularly Asians too, who are so proud that you are a successful Asian American and role model. Is there any advice you can give to these young people, especially if they have ambitions to really become a CEO like you?
You know, it's interesting. I was talking to somebody yesterday, and I had reread the Ascend study. For those of you who have
Mhm.
not, you should get a copy of it. Ascend studies Asian American success in tech.
Sure.
And they have this executive parity index where
Mhm.
if you're an Asian woman, you have a basically 30% chance of getting in the index, as opposed to if you're a white man, it's like 180% probability
Oh,
of being
wow.
successful. And again,
Wow.
this is just based on data, EEOC data from all the big tech companies. And I worked at a very big tech company, and I know exactly what that is like. And it's, you know, again, this is not a world full of overt discrimination where people are saying, we're not going to promote you because you're Asian or because you're a woman, but it's a lot of subtle things. It's a lot of things that are unconscious bias. It is so many things that are very difficult to pinpoint. And I
Mhm.
think, you know, my book is really about that. So the first chapter of the book is really about how there's not a level playing field. That
Mhm.
if I had a magic wand, I'd want that for all of us, but that's not the existence we all live in. And so the question is, how do you take back your power in the moments that you have that opportunity? How do you learn to ask for what you want? How do you learn
Mhm.
to carve your own path? How do you learn to, you know, speak up for each other and find allies? And I wrote this book from the perspective of all of the mistakes I made along the way, things I wish I could have told my younger self. And
Mhm.
things that I realized, and I tell the story of many women, particularly women of color, who have faced very similar situations, and how they chose to really zig when other people zagged. How do they chose to think differently about their careers? And, you know, each of those women generously offer their time. And they said, like, one woman's like, I refuse to allow labels to define me. And so,
Mhm.
you know, I realized that I'm going to define myself successfully the way I want to define myself. And, you know, another woman said, I just had to learn to ask. She's the woman who was the head of Johnson Space Center. And she
Mhm.
said, you know, her boss had asked her, you know, her skip level boss had asked her, well, you know, who should we pick for the next head of this, you know, organization? And she said, well, what about me? And they said, well, did you want the job? We didn't realize you wanted the job. And she's like, what do you mean? I'm literally, you know, in waiting for this job. And you know, you think that a woman who she went to space, she is the first, I think she's the first or second Hispanic woman in space, you know, and
Amazing.
it's
Yes.
just amazing to hear their stories of how these small things that they learn along their career can really empower us as the next generation in taking to the next level too.
Right. I think that's so important to take such a positive and view these setbacks as catalysts for positive action. I think so often members of minorities spend a lot of energy being angry, and that anger doesn't really turn into constructive power for them. And as you say, you want to take back the power and make sure that that power is you, and you don't waste power by feeling sorry for yourself or feeling a victim, but really saying, how will I rise above this? Accept it and then rise above it.
And that is a really important point. And part of the reason I wrote this book was, when Cheryl's my mentor and sponsor, so I know her really well, but she wrote the book Lean In, and so much of the criticism she got was, well, why should women have to lean in? We should just fix the system. And my book says, you know what? The system is the way it is. And it tells the story of a woman. She was the head of computer science at Carnegie Mellon. She's 75 years old. And she started an organization 45 years ago to help bring more girls into STEM. And they thought that they would be done by now. And we went to the 40th anniversary dinner and all of them were like, we're not done yet. And the arc of history bends towards justice and fairness, absolutely. But this is a group of women who started an organization, brought 1 million girls through this organization to bring them into STEM. And she was still fighting every single day to bring every girl into computer science at Carnegie Mellon. And she was an inspiration for me to write this book, partly because she said, look, I thought the work would be done, but the work is still not done after all this time. And she tells a story of how, she was basically fired from Berkeley and almost fired from Mills College because she was a woman and they didn't want women faculty there. The point of all of this is that she believed that we would be done by now. And maybe 40 years from now, we believe we'll be done too. And I hope in the very end of the book, I said, my daughters are 13 and 10. I hope someday they'll read this book and they're like, we don't need this. But I'm not banking on that, right? I'm not banking on that within 20 years or 10 years when they get out into the workforce, that life will be fair. And instead, I think we have to live within the reality that we have. Getting angry over injustice is, and we can use that as rocket fuel, but you still have to do the work. You still have to show up to every day at work. You still have to ask for what you want. You can't just be angry, and that's not enough.
Right. And when you say you have to ask for what you want, also ask for what you're worth. And this is all part of your mantra, is find your voice when you want to take back your power. And are there other elements of taking back your voice that would be helpful to share with young people? It's a well-used phrase, but how exactly do they take back and find their voice?
It's so often, I struggle with this a lot, especially as a woman, a minority, you want to be right every time you speak. You never want to make a mistake. Every word you speak is more risky. And so you want to be absolutely right. You want to button up everything. And then you might leave yourself out of the conversation. I remember, I tell the story of Carol Izazaki. She's an amazing career coach, a leadership coach and speaker. And she's just, her thing is, you go into a meeting and you're afraid to say something. So you walk out, you didn't say anything. And she said, she calls it the unintentional, terrible strategy. And she said, your strategy is, I'm going to go in this meeting and not say anything. Who walks in saying that? But how many times have you walked out having done that? And so for her, she teaches women, especially, how do you actually walk in with an intentional strategy to be heard? And if you're going to a meeting and you weren't heard, were you even there? Did it matter? Right. And I think that that's incredibly powerful, incredibly important, to really be intentional about your voice, about the things that you speak up about, the things that you represent. And to say, you know what, I might not be right, but I want to be part of this conversation. Right. And my voice needs to be heard. And so it's scary. It's hard. I'm extremely introverted. And it would have horrified me to actually speak in front of a group like this. But at the same time, I realized that all of these things are a skill. And so I treat things that other people treat as innate qualities as skills. And I said, I'm going to learn it. I might not be good at it. I might not have a natural talent for it. I don't have a natural talent for public speaking. I don't have a natural talent for being warm. I don't have a natural talent. I'm extremely introverted. And so I said, I'm going to learn, I'm going to teach myself how to be better at these things. And I think that's the superpower. You know, if you have imposter syndrome, you don't say, well, I'm going to be the expert. Someone is always going to be smarter than you. Instead, what you should say is, I'm going to be the expert at learning faster than other people, at assimilation of information faster, of learning faster, of, you know, understanding faster. That is going to be my superpower. You don't have to be the best. You just have to learn the fastest.
Absolutely. And I think, and a part and parcel of this is really having the confidence that you may have something worthwhile to share with the meeting. So often women go in and the question comes up and they really have a good answer, but they second guess themselves, they hesitate. And before you know it, a man has raised his hand and his answer is probably not half as good as hers. And she ends up kicking herself. And I think the important thing is to feel confident that you have as good an answer as anyone else in the room. And you should raise your hand and speak out. And also I find when there are a few women in the room, they're minority, and it could be a racial minority too. When one speaks out, the rest begin to find their voice and their confidence. And sometimes you almost have to say, well, I've got to make sure that women are noticed in this room. So if I don't speak up, I'm adding to that invisible gender. So I have to speak up. So I think if you think you're doing it for other people and you're not just doing it for yourself, because a lot of women don't like to show off. They think raising their hand is showing off. But if you say, I'm doing this because I want women to have a voice, then you're empowering yourself and the others in the room.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. And then we talked about how you find your voice. And along the way, we talked a little bit about how to be seen. And we talked about how to be seen in a meeting. But are there any other ways for a woman with her eyes set on the C-suite that she can increase her visibility and her sense of value to her colleagues?
Yeah, I saw actually a question, and it was along this lines, which was, when did I start writing when did I start writing, and then how did I come up with writing this book? You know, so in 2016, I had a manager who said, you know, I want you to write more. And I thought that was crazy. I didn't write anything. I barely ever posted internally in, you know, the internal equivalent of Slack. I didn't, you know, which is called Workplace. I posted very little. And, you know, I just didn't have much of a voice. And he said, I think you need to do this. And he asked me to do it. And he said, I'm requiring you. He was my new manager. We had a very fraught relationship. And he said, this is the only thing I'm going to ask of you. You can ask anything you want of me, but my thing is you have to write and publish something every month. And I'm like, what am I going to write about? What am I going to say? Like, why would anyone listen to me? And I remember a year later, I said to him, like, my greatest fear when I write is that no one wants to read what I have to say. And he writes pretty prolifically. He's actually pretty well known. And he said, oh, my problem is I worry that everyone's gonna read what I'm gonna say. And I said, that's so typical of him and me, right? He's a guy with a big voice, you know, when he walks in a room, everyone notices, and I try to sneak in. And he said, but the answer for both of us is the same thing. We should write for the one person who needed to read this today. And that gave me the freedom to say, you know what, maybe not everyone's going to agree with what I'm going to say. Maybe not everyone needs to read this, but one person, two people, a handful of people might get value out of this. Someday this might touch somebody. So let's focus on that. And I think by kind of, you know, the problem is you overthink. That's actually why most people don't do things. They overthink it. What if someone judges me? What if I do this wrong? What if someone corrects me? And I just said, you know what, I'm just going to write because it's my gift. And you know what? People might receive it differently than I hope. And that's okay. And, you know, it was, I started publishing the newsletter last year at the beginning of the year. And that was so every year I do a challenge, you know, so I do these New Year's resolutions. And my challenge was, can I write a newsletter for a year? And so I tried really hard, and I think I posted 50 times by the end of the year. And it was really interesting to see just the feedback, how it opened up conversations. And it was something which, by the way, people think it takes a long time. It actually doesn't. I spent about an hour and a half per post. So it's actually not that big of a investment. And but the thing that I care about is it has opened so many doors to conversations I never would have had. I have met so many people who reach out. I had a friend from Singapore ping me. He's like, I was in a meeting today and someone shared your post in the middle of this meeting. He works for this big tech company in Singapore. And he said, when that person pulled up your article, I said, I know her. And I said, that's so crazy that some random person in a company in Singapore. But the point is that it opens conversation. It opens you up. It opens you up for criticism, but it also opens you up to a conversation and connection and opportunity. And so I think sometimes we worry about the criticism more than we think about the upside. But human nature is that we worry about downside risk more than we worry about the opportunity. And so I ask you to flip that on its head, because every time you put yourself out there, every time you invest, every time you endorse something, every time you're out there, you could be wrong, but you could be right. And I think so often we kind of say, well, we're very risk averse, but life is not lived by not taking risks. A lot of success is taking risks when it's the hard thing to do.
And also you can add to the conversation by not having a declaration, but a good question that adds to the conversation. Because very often a good discussion is advanced by having good questions asked by the participants. And then as people move through, they learn together. So there are so many ways that speaking out can benefit you and your group. I was just to finish up on the idea of being seen, because being seen is part of taking back your power. If you feel you've contributed and people think you are a contributor, but they're not really seeing you at the level that you think you should be seen at, and therefore they're not seeing you as at a higher level, how do you try to correct it?
That is one thing I did post about this, which is, why you're not getting promoted. And there was an article about this. There's a few things. So one thing I've seen when people get stuck in their career is that there is a U-shaped hole in the organization that you've created. No one can imagine you doing more. And one of my sponsors and mentors said to me, you need to work yourself out of a job so that people can see that you could do more. If you have a successor who can take your job, you can now take on a second team. You can take on, but the problem is we get better and better and better at doing something where our scope narrows to the point where we're the expert and there's literally is a Lulu-shaped hole in the world. But then you can't ever go, left, right, top, down, you're stuck. And so I encourage people to really think about what, 2 years from now, where do you want to be? And how do you open up the aperture? How do you think about looking at the world really different? And so the part that I think people worry about is, if I'm not great at this job, I'll never get another job. It's like, if I'm not great at this job and I can't find someone else to take on the things and delegate so that I can open up and learning. The challenge is that in companies, there's just tension between impact and learning. Right? Impact is what you give to the organization today. The more you do your job, the same exact job, the more impact you have and the easier it is, but you're probably learning less. If you're in a new job, you're learning more, but you're probably terrible at it at the start. And so that tension is constantly pulling against you. So I would encourage you to actually have a discussion with your manager and say, hey, my plan is to get to here. What is the gap between me and this next promotion or this opportunity to manage or this opportunity to take on more? Can you give me guidance as to what the distance is and what a plan would be to get there?
Absolutely.
Now, instead of saying, promote me, you're saying, let's work together. And you're pulling that person alongside you. And now they're on the journey with you. And if they say, well, we don't see a future with you here, great, you have your answer. But if they say, you're right, I think you could do more, here are the 3 things you need to do to prove that. And you say, okay, over the next 3 months, I'm going to check these things off. Here's what I'm going to do. And now you have a plan. And once you check it off, it's very hard for them to say, well, that documents, send an email saying, hey, we agreed to this. This is what we're doing. Here's the progress I made. And then have another conversation in 3 months. I feel like we treat our careers kind of like we're just throwing something over the fence. We're like, okay, so it's someone else's problem to take care of me. No, your career is something you care about more than anyone else. Right. And if you're not caring for it like a garden, where you're tending to it, you're watering it, you're weeding it, you're doing it wrong.
Absolutely. Well, Deb, you've given us so much good advice tonight. And I suppose the one thing most people learn from is by their mistakes. And so for someone as successful as you, perhaps it might be helpful for our listeners to have you just share with you in looking over the course of your career, is there anything that, if not a mistake, but something you would have done differently?
You know, the biggest challenges I've had with my career is each of the children that I had.
Mm.
And I am extremely fortunate. By the way, I wrote an entire chapter about how your career is more successful if you have balance at home, if you actually have somebody who can take care of work. And so, you know, you can do more work if somebody can take care of the work at home. And so the thing I say is, the most important career decision you make is who you choose to marry. And that's true for everybody, like not a gender thing, you know, whether we're same-sex couple or opposite sex couple. Who you choose to marry, who you choose as your partner, and who is way more important to your career than almost anything else you could choose to do. And so, you know, the thing that I struggled with each of my children was I completely lost my way after each of the children were born. I basically lost my job after each of them. So I kind of stepped back. I had a second in command. They were doing a good job. I didn't want to displace them. And so I had to figure out what I wanted to do next. And I kind of restarted each time. That is really hard. I see a lot of women who go through that in particular after you take 4 or 6 months off. It's really hard to kind of figure out. You're kind of in a different headspace, right? And so I lost a lot of momentum there. And I had to really force myself to get back into the game. And I think that's really hard, you know, physically and mentally to get back in the game when you're just out of it for so long. And my youngest was particularly hard because she had colic for a year. My father was in hospice when she was born. So all these things happened all at once. And I restarted my career yet again in a new team. I left my team, I started over. And these things really have taken a toll because you're basically taking a step backward every time and trying to restart and re-energize. And, you know, in the end, each time I fought my way back, but I can see why a lot of people like step back and say, you know what, maybe not. I don't have this in me. And that's where you lose a lot of people. If you actually look at the women who leave tech, a lot of them leave in kind of their mid-30s when you have 2, 3 kids. And you have to decide, what am I going to do? How am I going to get the kids to school? You know, how am I going to juggle daycare, nanny? What if someone gets sick? And the burden often falls to the woman. That's just how it works in our society.
Yeah.
Fortunately, my husband is incredible and I've had the best of husbands, but I don't know how people do it every day. And it's really hard. And so it's just a reminder that, you know, I had to talk myself into staying in tech. I actually quit. I went to the VP that I was looking for and I said, I quit. I want to leave tech because I just couldn't deal with it. And I'm glad I didn't, but it was really hard to kind of stay in the game for a long time when you just feel like just parenthood and working in a high intensity career is very difficult.
Absolutely. And I think you were mentioning the emotional toll. I think so many women who take time off to have family, their self-confidence is damaged and they're not sure if they're able to make the return. And given that, how can companies and colleagues help women get past that threshold?
I think a lot of it is, do you have the support system? And do you have kind of the scaffolding in companies to really help? Because there's, you know, it's kind of, when it's a free-for-all, it's just the burden ends up in the women because they're the ones who physically have to be pregnant, they're breastfeeding, it's difficult. But if you have support, if you have flexibility, that is incredibly important so that women can ease back into work, so they can figure out what it is, you know, that they need to do with childcare. And that kind of support is really priceless.
Well, that's something that hopefully we all are alert to, and whether we're the bosses or we're the colleagues or we're the ones who are reassessing ourselves, that we can all come together to try to empower women who take leave for families. It's so important that families can work alongside careers.
Yeah.
But I apologize, we've run over our time. I know you have such a heavy schedule, but I do have good news for our participants, is that Deb has very kindly agreed to do a roundtable with students on Thursday. That's the 21st, between 1 o'clock and 1:45. And it's a much coveted seat at the roundtable, and we do have a few seats left. So first come, first serve. If you have time to participate in this 45 minutes in person, online, Deb, please email Ryan Hatta, and his email again is his number is rkh2127 gsb.columbia.edu. And I think he'll, and when you do email him, he would like you to send him a current CV as well as 2 questions you might have for Deb. This way it helps him move the roundtable along more efficiently. But so Deb, I can't thank you enough. It's been such a pleasure and so inspiring to hear your story. I'm sure our young people in particular have learned a lot. And on behalf of Chazen Institute for Global Business, we want to thank you for joining us, and feel free to always come back. Even though you're a Stanford graduate, you're now an honorary CBSer. So we would welcome you back at any time.
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation, Lulu. And I didn't get to all the questions in the Q&A, but if you do subscribe to my newsletter, if you just reply to any of the newsletters, I will get it, and I'm happy to answer questions there as well.
Great, thank you. I got to some of the questions that were texted to me, but I know we could take another hour of your time, but I have to let you go. So thank you again from all of us.
Take care. Thanks for the invitation.
Nice to see you. Bye-bye.
Bye.